If you're on any social media platform these days, it seems like there's generally a lot of noise about Etsy versus, well, just about every other platform. There's even a recent one claiming that everyone is leaving Etsy, and you should too. And of course, there's plenty of videos out there recommending platforms like Amazon or Shopify as alternatives. So if you're a new print-on-demand seller, or even if you landed on this video and you're a handmade seller, hi, welcome. You may be thinking, gosh, Etsy sounds kind of like a scary place. Or you may be wondering, should I go with Etsy or maybe something else? Now, at the end of the day, my opinion is just one of many. But as someone who has built a six-figure handmade business that started on Etsy in 2017 and is now on Shopify, and a six-figure print-on-demand business that I started more recently in 2022 that runs entirely on Etsy, I feel fairly capable of at least giving you some context on these claims and where I think the best place is to be, depending on where you're at in your journey. So for this video, I want to cover the reality of Etsy fees, the reality of running your own platform versus a marketplace like Etsy, the reality of competition, and what I think is the best approach. In case we haven't met yet, my name is Mandy, and as the owner of multiple six-figure businesses, including Etsy print-on-demand shops, my goal is to provide you with strategies to simplify the print-on-demand journey, scale your business faster, and ultimately achieve your own success. Now, as I talk more about Etsy, I want to make one disclaimer very clear. When I talk about Etsy, I am talking about legitimate sellers that follow the rules by either selling handmade items, digital product sellers, sellers that use production partners to help with fulfillment of their designs, aka print on demand, vintage sellers, and supply sellers. That very last one might surprise you, but fun history fact, I started with Etsy years ago when they still had separate marketplaces for vintage products as well as a separate marketplace for selling supplies. And they even had their own wholesale platform, if you remember back in the day. But several years ago, they got rid of wholesale and combined all the others. And so that is why today you do see a variety of listings out there that might seem a little sketchy, but they're actually from legitimate supply sellers. On the other hand, resellers that are using drop shipping to sell cheap junk at bottom dollar, as well as all of those shops out there making millions of selling Disney and other trademarked items, can go pound sand. Anyway, to start off with, a lot of these video comparisons talk about the small amount of profit that sellers are left with due to the astronomical Etsy fees. And while yes, Etsy does have fees, what these arguments often fail to mention is that many sellers, both handmade and print-on-demand sellers alike, guess on pricing. Or they look at another listing that looks similar and set their price based on that, or even below that price, thinking that they'll be able to compete. And in many of these cases, what I often see happen is they'll set that price and then run the numbers at the end of a month of selling and realize they've only made a few dollars after putting in hours of hard work. Don't do that. Business 101. You must understand your costs and price your products accordingly. For context, as a handmade seller, the standard calculation for setting your price is by taking all of your costs, including materials and time, multiply that cost by 2.2, that's your wholesale price. Then take that number, multiply that by 2, and that's your retail price. And if your product is unique or targeted to a very profitable customer base, you can sometimes go even higher than that. Now that's a very general rule of thumb, but for most sellers, that should leave more than enough profit on Etsy. For further context, many sellers also want to sell via wholesale. I personally operate my handmade business on the Fair platform, and seller fees can be as high as 25%, and that's on wholesale prices, not retail. Now that's a whole other discussion, but the point is when it comes to fees, anytime you are using a platform, it is all about context and perspective. Business costs time and money. Price your products accordingly, period. Etsy fees are not the reason that these sellers are not making any money, because quite frankly, Etsy fees are low compared to so many other platforms. If you have a product that is unique to the market, you do not need to race to the bottom on price, because quite frankly, that is not a very profitable way of running a business. Now for my print-on-demand sellers, of course, it's a little bit different when it comes to pricing, because you are paying for the convenience of somebody else to handle all of the labor, hold that inventory, and take care of the fulfillment for you. But the principle is still the same. No all of your costs and factor that into your pricing strategy. Use a profit calculator and then establish a price that comes with a profit that you feel comfortable with as a business. And remember, not all print-on-demand products will have the same amount of profit, so you may want to adjust which type of products that you offer if you're wanting to yield a higher profit margin. As an example, products like stickers are going to have a very low profit margin, whereas other print-on-demand products like metal wall art, even sweatshirts, are going to have a higher profit margin. If you want to learn more about profit, I've linked my video on that here so that you can go check it out. Now, outside of pricing your products, every platform is going to have some variation of fees or costs associated with using it. Every platform will have a payment processing fee, which on average is typically 2 to 3% and is intended to cover the cost of credit card processing fees that are charged by companies like MasterCard and Visa. Then there's third-party platforms like Amazon or eBay that charge additional seller fees just like Etsy. And if you're on your own platform like a Shopify or a Wix or a Squarespace, you're typically going to be paying at least $30 a month for a basic e-commerce plan, whether you're making sales or not. And unless you have an existing following, you will likely be spending money not only on your platform, but also on driving your own traffic there as well. Which is a perfect segue into the reality of running your own platform versus selling on a marketplace platform like Etsy. Yes, let's get one thing out of the way. Etsy is a publicly traded company with shareholders. So yes, they're making tons of money, but they're also a business and they also want to make profit too. And Etsy only exists and makes money if sellers are actually selling. So at a minimum, they're taking at least a portion of those fees that they charge sellers, and they're turning around and spending millions every year on advertising and marketing strategies to drive enormous amounts of traffic to the platform. In 2022 alone, Etsy invested over $500 million in its advertising and marketing strategies. This means that they're using at least some of their dollars to drive traffic to the shops and sellers that are on Etsy. Now that doesn't mean they're all flocking to your listing, but it does mean that you have a way more opportunity to get in front of buyers with organic traffic. There have been dozens of other smaller marketplaces that have tried to create smaller hubs that are similar to Etsy for the handmade space in particular, several of which I've actually tried over the years, and they simply cannot compete with the amount of traffic that they bring to their platform every year. And what that means in terms of driving sales for the sellers that are there. And not only that, but Etsy is relatively turnkey, meaning that in fairly short order, it's very easy to start a shop and put up listings, technically speaking. This of course doesn't take into account product and keyword research, but quite frankly, you should be doing that regardless of which platform you're using. The flip side is of course starting with your own platform, and that means setting up your own website using platforms like Shopify, Wix, Squarespace. There are lots of options out there. I've used both Wix and Shopify over the years, and I will tell you, it's a very different learning curve. And there are a lot more things that you need to make sure you pay attention to. For example, setting up sales tax correctly, making sure you have the correct terms of service policies associated with your website, configuring the whole thing from top to bottom, even if you are starting with a basic theme or template. You still have to plug in a lot of information yourself. Designing and structuring the site so that it looks cohesive and legitimate as a website, configuring your website SEO, setting up a domain, and so much more. None of these things are inherently complicated, but they are a very different learning curve, especially depending on your technical skills. And what people always fail to mention in these scathing commentaries about Etsy is how hard it can be to drive your own traffic on your own to your own website when you are a brand new seller with zero track record. Now, of course, if you have a decent sized social following or are part of large social circles where you can potentially draw customers from and you're selling something based on that demographic, that's one thing. But the average person does not have that, which means you have to start building a social media presence on top of everything else that you're doing to start up a brand. And or you'll need to make a significant investment in things like Facebook or Google ads and buy that traffic, which again means more money going towards items that you have no idea whether or not they're going to sell. At least when I use Etsy ads on my listings, I can get some pretty decent readily available data on which listings are actually performing or not. And because they are ads specific for Etsy, the ad spend itself is going to be much more targeted towards consumers that are already on Etsy looking for things to buy. And finally, let's talk about the reality of product competition on Etsy. Yes, Etsy is a marketplace, which means you're going to be up against lots of other sellers. Millions, in fact. Which again, in the grand scheme of things, you against millions versus you against the rest of the internet with your own platform, again, still seems very different. Which when it comes to Etsy is why you will hear me say again and again and again that you need to be able to stand out from the crowd. If your designs aren't good, or if your designs are super generic, or if your mock-ups aren't good and really highlighting your product, or if there's no demand for what you're selling, it will not sell. This is why spending some time researching upfront is critical. And I don't mean researching the shops that have been on the platform for years and years, who are already market leaders with their products. Simply copying those will not get you anywhere. I'm talking about using platforms like eRank or Everbee to actually identify products that are in demand from shops that aren't as established. Depending on what you're selling, you can also look at retailers to determine what some of the trends are, or simply go out and do some trend research out on Pinterest. But the point is, you need to be able to look for the demand and look for specific customers and niches to target. So many print-on-demand sellers will swear up and down that Etsy doesn't work, and then go on these negativity rants and get tons of traction with them on social media. And then I look at their shops and see that they've taken a generic design from Creative Fabrica or Canva, slapped it onto a t-shirt as is with no creative changes, and then try and sell it for $30. That won't work. Or they take that same generic design, try to sell it for bottom dollar because it looks just like another listing out there from another seller that downloaded the same generic design, so now they're competing on the lowest price. And then they get upset because they only made $2 in profit if they even sold it at all. That's probably accurate. But if you can master some of the basic principles of identifying a customer within a niche that has a demand, tailor a unique design that will resonate with that customer, that doesn't look like every other design out there on Etsy, and then build your shop around that, there is plenty of room for success with that approach. But you have to be willing to put in the time, the ambition, and the patience to see it through, and not use the volume of competition or fees on Etsy as an excuse for why something is or isn't succeeding. So the approach that I recommend when it comes to Etsy versus starting with your own platform, if you are a brand new seller and you do not have a large existing following, start with Etsy. Plain and simple. Etsy gives you a platform for experimenting with products and designs and honing in on what works for you and your customer or doesn't. This helps you validate what you are selling. And oftentimes what you start with selling on Etsy in the beginning likely won't look the same once you're a year into it or even two. You will continue to learn and grow and adapt. But take advantage of this marketplace that literally brings in millions of shoppers every year and use it to discover the designs and products that will sell well to your particular audience. If you haven't already seen my free master course on starting with Etsy print on demand, I'll link that playlist for you, and it's right here on my channel. And be sure to watch the shop setup bonus video that goes along with that for the approach that I use for reducing the chances of getting suspended in the beginning as a new shop, which is another thing you probably hear a lot about. Then, once you get some traction, and if you want to start building a bigger brand presence around your products, or if you just want to have it as a backup outside of Etsy, you can consider exploring platforms like Shopify down the road, which I do recommend Shopify as a great e-commerce platform, but not necessarily for a beginner. Because by then, once you have some traction, you should start to get a better sense of what's working in terms of your product mix as well as your ideal audience. And along the way, you can build in social media, drive your Etsy customers to that social media presence, and then once you do have your own website, you can use your social media platform with a link to funnel customers to your actual website while you're still getting organic traffic to your shop in Etsy. Because even if you do decide to add on your own website, you can absolutely still run both. Make sure you understand all of the ins and outs of having your own website, what that means, and what those differences are before you jump into it. Don't just do it because someone had a bad experience on Etsy and said you should. Bottom line, do I drink the Etsy Kool-Aid? No. I get that it's an imperfect system and that it's got plenty of flaws, but quite frankly, so does everything else out there in some form or another. And I'm not saying that there aren't real cases out there where Etsy isn't the right fit for someone, or that there aren't legitimate stories of struggles or people getting burned by Etsy in some way. But I guarantee you will also find similar stories on people that have used other platforms, including their own. Some people have had bad experiences with Shopify. Some people have had terrible experiences with Wix. People have issues with platforms like PayPal or Amazon or eBay. And you know what these experiences all have in common? These are all things that can happen while running a business. It's not always rainbows and puppy dogs. Platforms have bad days, payment processors have bad days. Bad things happen to good business owners, whether they're on Etsy or Amazon or Shopify, or even if they're running their own brick and mortar shop. But that's certainly not to say that it's the majority of cases out there, and it certainly shouldn't be the reason that dictates the decisions that you make for your business, because that's the glorious thing about running a business. It's yours. So if you want to sell on Etsy, go crush your goals on Etsy. It is 100% possible. New sellers on Etsy are finding success there every single day. And if you feel strongly about starting on a different platform for one reason or another, go build your empire there, and I will still be cheering you on. This is not a space for judgment, but I do think it's super important to have the right context and to really understand what you're getting into in either situation without the clickbait or the negativity that you quite often hear. Negativity will always be the loudest voice in the room. And I get it. It's harder to hear the positive stories out there because most of the time in those cases, it's considered normal for things to be going well, and they do. But what I have learned over the years of running multiple businesses is to not take advice from people who haven't done what you want to do, because without context or seeing all of the behind the scenes, you may never fully have an idea of why something didn't work for someone else, and it likely would have no bearing on whether or not you can find success. Learn from the sellers and businesses that are thriving, because success leaves clues, and be willing to learn and understand what their journey was like to reach that success, how hard they worked, and the trials that they likely also experienced along the way before they reached their success. In most cases, you'll find that their day one probably started out a lot like yours. I hope this video was helpful for you. If you want to learn more about my strategies for print-on-demand success, make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming content. And in the meantime, make sure you check out my dedicated playlist with that masterclass course right here on my channel. Thanks for watching. I'm so glad you're here, and I'll see you next time. And if you're looking for more helpful ways to continue the work and stay connected, I invite you to join me over on Patreon, where I provide a membership to get exclusive access to my Google Drive with all sorts of wonderful tools and resources that I've created and continue adding to every month. It's also a place to join conversations as I think about future content and how I can serve you with the most amount of value. I also hope that you'll smash that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on all of the exciting upcoming content that I've got planned for this channel. And finally, I invite you to check out my brand new website where you can subscribe to my own email list, follow along on new blog content that I will be building, and access other freebies that I have available on there to support you on your journey.